Welcome into Basketball by Association. My name is Arky. That is Joel. Joel, did people think we were done once Giannis hoisted the trophy?
We were indeed not done. We were far from the done. This is our first off-season episode, which is fun in and of itself. We do dial back now to just once a week instead of every other week. We're still going to keep the naming convention. This is episode 69. No NBA player in history has ever worn number 69 because apparently NBA players must be more mature than football players who wear it all the time. So our little convention has been that you got to go with the year. And we've looked at MVPs, we've looked at rookies of the year, that sort of thing. And you'll have to correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm pretty sure we have not had this gentleman as a moniker for our show yet, but it's very fitting if we could. Episode 69, I want to call the Wes Unseld episode. Because Junior just got hired by the Washington Wizards, and that's pretty cool.
I don't hate it. I also, like in the back of my brain, I think we may have had a Wes Unseld. But I also know that my brain may be thinking recency bias because we talked about Wes Unseld somewhat recently in relation to his son.
We did. So here's what we'll do. Here's what we'll do to cover our tracks because there's no way I'm going back and fixing this. We're going to add a second name into this. We'll call it the Wes Unseld and Mel Daniels because guess what? Mel Daniels was the ABA's MVP in 1969. So we got the NBA going, the ABA going. It's episode 69. I'm just going to leave it at that. We got Mel Daniels. We got Wes Unseld.
Ready to confirm to you that this will definitely be the first time we've mentioned Mel Daniels on the show.
We have. Yeah.
Yeah. This will be the first time, possibly the last.
Well, it may be. And especially what's really fun about this is that in 1969, as he gets that MVP, it was for the Oakland Oaks. Fun fact, Mel Daniels won the ABA MVP 2 years later again with the Utah Stars, two very defunct franchises, but it's still kind of cool. So
beyond defunct. Right. So past defunct.
They brought in the noise and defunct.
All right. You know what? I'm not even going to beat that. I'm not even going to try. You know what? There you go. There you go, Joel Cordes. Let's talk about a couple of NBA offseason things. I want to just start with basketball that's literally still happening, and that's Team USA over in Tokyo. Big loss to France. Not great. A 7-point loss there in the first matchup of the Tokyo games. I think it was like 9 hours after like Devin Booker and Chris Middleton and Drew Holiday got there. They're like, oh, I guess we're playing now.
And Drew Holiday was the only like Team USA player who really honestly had a good game. 18 points and 7 boards and 4 assists, and everybody else not so good. Chris Middleton 0 of 2 and Devin Booker 1 of 6.
Shocking when you fly 10 hours, right? Like you're not exactly already ready to pump it up and dunk it as soon as you get off the court. There was a video that was put out. I think it was by maybe it's Team USA basketball. There was a video of them sort of showing up at like 2:00 local time or something into the hotel, and they're all masked up. And Greg Popovich is down there like grabbing Devin Booker's arm, and I'm probably being like, "Hey man, we got practice in like shoot around in like 3 hours." So,
right. And actually, if they were flying from Milwaukee to Japan,
well, I don't know if that's where they were going. Like they were all three. Were they all three together? That could. I mean, they had to have been on this. I shouldn't say had to have been because they can.
No, I mean, you might be separate flights and whatnot, but I doubt Devin Booker flew home to Phoenix and then flew to Japan. Chances are you left from Milwaukee based on the timetable. I've done that flight from like Detroit and Chicago over to Narita, Japan a couple of times. That ain't 10 hours. That's 14 hours.
Yeah, okay. Sorry,
on that flight to get over. So it is, and it is devastating to your body clock. So I can't imagine to then go out and play basketball at a high level. You're already tired. You've got the adrenaline. if you're Devin Booker, you got the disappointment going on. You get off, and then you're going to go play against a well-drilled French team that is one of the better teams every single year for like the last 15 years, in the Olympics. That ain't easy. So it's actually kind of impressive that Drew Holiday would have 18 points, even though they lost.
Yeah, and it's not as if like those guys were being counted on to be sort of the starters and get ready for game one. They'll be sort of slowly integrated, I'm sure, as slow as you can for a couple-week Olympic adventure that you'll have. But I found a couple of things interesting about this. And one of the big main themes of this is that the USA just isn't used to this basketball. Right, like the NBA players. In fact, Luka Doncic said it. It's a quote that's going right back around. That said, it's easier to score in the NBA than it is to score against teams from Europe and to play in European basketball and FIBA basketball. That alongside with Dame Lillard, who also just came out and said those teams play at a different level of intensity when they're playing for their country. He's also gotten roasted because people are saying, why don't you play at a different level since you're playing for your country? But it is an interesting confluence of events that these NBA players who sort of aren't used to this are getting back into against better teams. I should say better teams that are better than probably they expect them to be. And it's kind of showing, right? Greg Popovich has lost, 5 of the last 8 international contests as the head coach and taking over from Mike Krzyzewski, going back a couple of years in China for the World Games. Like, he's not had a great run as the head coach of Team USA, and
Popovich, by the way, was one of the main assistants to that Larry Brown team in 2000 or whatever it was that didn't medal. That's kind of like the embarrassment team that nobody wants to talk about, when it was like Tim Duncan and Stephon Marbury and I think Garnett was on that team.
Was that 2004?
That might have been 4. It might have been. I'd have to go back and look.
It's their first Olympics, I think, lost since 2004. But also I think it was. I'll look that up real quick for you. But go ahead as your point is.
Yeah, no, I mean it's to double on to that idea that Popovich has not had a good Olympics run at all. So it was a little eyebrow raising when he was the guy that got the nod to go forward with Team USA again after Coach K was stepping down and that sort of thing. He was honestly not the one I would have expected. Now, Pop does have a good reputation among NBA players across the board. So there's a lot to be said for that because you've got so many guys coming in. He's obviously been around the Olympics plenty of times, and his NBA record speaks for itself. But that's kind of a tough one, and this does not help his legacy by any means.
Yeah, it was Rudy Tomjanovich who was the head coach in 2000. They gold that year, but in 2004 they bronzed with Larry Brown.
Okay.
And I think they were knocked out in the semi. Yeah, knocked out. I think it's a big sense. They were knocked out in the semis to get to the bronze medal game. But yeah, this is a tough look for Popovich, and I wonder how much we as fans should continue to expect our basketball team to be dominant at that level. I mean, they were like 12.5-point favorites, and granted, that's just to get people betting money on it to try to get two sides. But they were seen as a pretty strong favorite based on essentially just the roster that was there, and they had a big lead at halftime. I mean, it was a disastrous third quarter that got France back into that game, and the fourth quarter was sort of back and forth. But I just wonder from your standpoint if you think that we really should start tamping down our expectations with Team USA basketball as far as how big we can defeat teams, and we should be able just to run through international basketball like we got sort of accustomed to.
No, I think that ship sailed a while ago. That ship honestly sailed 8 years ago in my mind, because FIBA has proven that. The Olympics have proven that. Yes, the U.S.
But we always
has
go
done
back
well.
to like our guys don't care as much. Like it seems like it's the NBA.
That's a cop out. That's an excuse at this point.
I think so, but do you feel like that's sort of like? When
Look,
you've
I mean,
seen them, do you think that that's accurately reflected in the way they play?
12 years ago, 8 years ago, it was, oh, our teams are thrown together. And 16 years ago in that 2004 debacle, our teams are thrown together too quickly, haphazardly. Those guys get to practice and drill and drill and drill and all that sort of stuff. And they've been playing together in the same system, often as youth, in youth Olympic organizations. So that was the excuse then. And there's reason behind that too. And now it's, oh, well, they care more than our guys do. I think the ship has sailed to where you got to go look the game, or it's just, oh, the game is so different. Yeah, all of those things have nuggets of truth. But the elephant in the room is those other teams, those other countries are routinely sending good NBA players to the NBA. And just as there are plenty of guys out there walking the street or playing overseas or whatever, who didn't make the NBA for one reason or another, but everybody says, yeah, that guy probably could play in the NBA. He's good enough to be there. There are plenty of those guys over in Europe or in Israel or in, the Chinese league or wherever. There are plenty of guys who could get to the NBA and they just choose not to as well because they're a big enough star. They don't want to come over and sit the bench. They're actually going to make more money playing overseas. Or it's a pride thing, or they just don't want to be in the U.S. There are plenty of those guys today. So I think we just have to get past the excuses, which kind of allow the xenophobic elephant in the room, which is no, the world can play basketball just like we do. And just like you got to train and take it incredibly seriously if you want to go medal for the USA in the swim team or gymnastics, or downhill skiing in the winter or whatever it is in all of these other sports, right. You got to do the same thing here. There is no more of the monopoly of just because we're from America, we're better at basketball. Like that ship sailed a while ago.
And I'm guessing you're also out on the whole, we should be sending college players because they'll actually want to represent the country too.
Yeah, I wouldn't do that.
Unless you want France to beat you by 30.
Right. Yeah. I mean, those, unless you have a system in place where those college guys have been playing together and drilled together for so long and what have you, like it is a conundrum. It's a conundrum to take the NBA players to do this. But at the same time, there's only so many excuses when you got those other guys for their teams coming out of either the NBA. I mean, you look at like the France roster, for example.
Yeah, exactly.
Nick Batum, Rudy Gobert, Evan Fournier, Timothy Lawu-Cabarrot, and Frank Ntilikina.
Half their roster plays in the NBA almost.
Right. So they were up against the exact same thing. You got Nando De Colo, used to be in the NBA. Garrison Yabusele used to be in the NBA. Vince Poirier had a NBA cup of coffee. So that's 3 other guys that were in the league. You're only looking at 4, maybe 5 players from that French roster who have never stepped foot in the NBA before. So they're all up against that scheduling thing, and they're coming out of their own leagues too, which I understand are on a little bit of a different schedule due to FIBA. And maybe the NBA needs to look at that and go, we can't have a foot in each side. Are we going to schedule truly around the Olympics from now on?
Right.
And the FIBA schedule? Or are we going to have to look at maybe a mixed sort of team where you got some college players and you've got some NBA guys, or, those guys who maybe you're not going to get the best of the best superstars, but you're going to get really good players who are willing to commit for, the length of time that this is going to take. And you know what? Start paying them a lot extra to do it. Like, just do it.
Right. It's not like there's not some money somewhere for something like that. If that is truly what you're sort of interested in. You can't have Kevin Durant get into foul trouble quickly in a game like that if you want to succeed, especially if they're able to get past these rounds or past the pool play and get into the deep into the Olympics, so we can hopefully, I say we because it's America. It's America. If you want to get into the medaling state rounds, and you can't shoot 36%. Like, you just don't win anywhere if you shoot 36%. And it was sort of discussed back when they were losing to Nigeria, sort of how much more they seemed to be expecting foul calls that weren't being called, that these players sort of just just aren't used to. And I get it. I understand, like, it's a different level of basketball, but
the movement is different. The
yeah.
spacing is different. If you sit and watch that NBA game versus a FIBA game, you notice that immediately. Yes, it is still basketball, but you're right. The level of fouling and physicality is different. And that's not just like, oh, I drove to the basket and I took a hard foul that the ref didn't call. It's also the screens. It's fighting through that movement. It's the opposite team screening you and really, laying the wood when they're going to do that. And you fighting through those different things. And that's not to say that the NBA is wussy, although sometimes there are certain ways that NBA games are called where we look at that and go, why? Why is it so light? But it is different. And you absolutely will not get the benefit of the NBA superstar call when you are over playing FIBA or Olympic basketball. You will get the opposite of that, and it's just human nature. It's the way it is. So for certain guys, this honestly to me is like the chicken coming home to roost a little bit, because if you're Kevin Durant, you're used to sometimes drawing those fouls where a guy just looked at you wrong and you got that bailout call, and you're going to really have to get hammered at the FIBA and Olympic level for the referee to give you a call because you were Kevin Durant, because they probably swallowed their whistle because you were Kevin Durant, honestly.
Yeah, I needed to go back and reopen this thing to see how many. There were 45 total free throws, and they were both pretty even, 24-21, with France getting just a few more attempts at it. And also, late game situations with the fouling sort of extended that lead when the USA had a little bit of a shot at the end. So let me ask you this. If we're not going to send the college players, if we're not going to create a system where it's just guys who are just dedicated to playing this sort of type of basketball year round, we're going to schedule around the international, the World Cup and the Olympics. Is there someone that you would like to have seen on this roster? Because I have someone in mind, and that's someone who wanted to go, and when they needed a guy, basically said, "Don't come after me now."
Let's hear who you have in mind, because
It's Trae Young.
Yeah, I thought that's who we were going to go with.
Yeah, Trae Young wanted to be a part of this team, and then when you had a couple guys back out like JaVale McGee, they had to come back home. Trae Young essentially said, "You didn't want me then, don't come after me now," which is a weird way to look at it, by the way, right? Like, it's a weird way when you're trying to represent your country to be like, "Hey, no, man, listen, you didn't want me then, you can't have me now." All right, kind of weird. But I think Trae Young would be a fascinating sort of addition to sort of this team, because what they don't have on that roster is an extra scoring piece. And
I disagree, though. You can't tell me on a roster that has Zach LaVine, one-way player, Damian Lillard, pretty much one-way player.
Yes, I agree.
And then you got Devin Booker, who I know is coming back from the Olympics, but is a scorer. Jason Tatum, scorer. Chris Middleton, scorer. Kevin Durant, scorer. You got plenty of guys, right?
I got also a guy in Trae Young who is used to getting the tough points, who is tough to getting the little guy points, who is used to being in the paint and fighting for some of those points, more so than a Zach LaVine of the world. I would argue that he would give you that energy and extra spark, and could get tough guy possessions that this team could use, right? I mean, I think there's a bunch of names you could throw out there that USA could use, right? That could work out, like Anthony Davis if he was healthy, right? Like, you just throw out there. But I think Trae Young would be a tremendous asset for the way this sort of roster is set up.
I don't disagree that Trae Young could have been helpful. I'm not sold on him helpful for this particular roster. Okay. To me, he's the same player essentially as what Damian Lillard brings to your team USA. And if you've got one, you don't necessarily need another who's filling that kind of mold.
Okay.
What I do think is that you still have too many guys who are one-way players, and it's not as bad as it looks because you do have some defensive first guys. You got Green there.
Yeah, Draymond.
You know, JaVale McGee was such an odd addition to this. Like literally, were they scraping the bottom of the barrel? Although McGee, for an Olympic style of game, can be helpful, but that's not the guy I would have thought. Drew Holiday, defensive first guy. Middleton's a decent defender. But to me, you know, and then Bam Adebayo, total two-way player. That makes a lot of sense. To me, though, if I'm looking at a roster, I want as many true two-way guys who are knockdown outside shooters. I'm always going to have that spot for a Durant or a, you know, and or a Damian Lillard or a Trae Young. You're going to need those guys, and Drew Holiday fits this. But like, if Klay Thompson was healthy, that's a perfect archetype of somebody I want. I want a Malcolm Brogdon. I want. I'm rolling through my list here.
Malcolm Brogdon, I put up there with. If you gave me Trae or Malcolm, I'd be happy.
Yeah, you know, I would have taken. He's not as great of a defender, but he is a really dogged physical player. I would have taken, like, looking in Minnesota, like Malik Beasley or Anthony Edwards. Those are 20-point per game guys at the NBA level, but who play really physical. I want Brandon Ingram. You know, I want that length of a guy who really can scrap on defense, but he can play either that spot up or on the ball role. And the truth is, there just aren't a ton of those guys at the NBA level, but like a Brad Beal makes sense too. And the hard part is a lot of these guys you want, and then they're not available.
Well, that's what I was going to say. Like you brought up a few interesting names that I'd also be okay with. Like I said, there's a handful that I would have been cool with. Trae's just number one on my list. Mm-hmm. How far did you have to go down on the list to get people who would say, sure, right? Like like just think if like Drew Holiday and Chris Middleton said no because they spent so much time playing in the finals and then they won the championship and had to parade and stuff. Like those guys had every reason to say we didn't want to, right?
And here's how I would flip the process, because you're talking about like the intangibles of a guy wanting to be there, putting in the work, really making this a thing. I would open this up to volunteerism. So if Trae Young is a guy who showed up early and said, I want to be on the roster, boom, you're in. Duncan Robinson says, I want to be on the USA roster, boom, you're in. Certainly there's going to be maybe some guys where you go, thanks, but no thanks, because we have somebody filling your type of role already. Mm-hmm. I don't need a whole bunch of Trae Young clones or whatever. That might happen. But first, take the guys who are like, yes, I want to do this, and open up enough of a pay bonus that, yeah, it's never, you know, an extra $3 million is not going to change Kevin Durant's mind. But you don't think an extra $3 million is going to change Duncan Robinson's mind?
Of course.
Or some of these mid-level guys who are like, you know, their money means a lot. The prestige would mean a lot. They are ready, willing, and able, and they fit something that your team needed. I will take that, and I will take a, you know, he's probably not a great Olympic example, but I'm just kind of looking down the depth chart. I would take a Devontae Graham, for example, if he's going, I want to be on this team. This is a lifelong dream of mine. I'm going to bust my tail to do this. I want that guy versus the guy I have to call up and he's like, well, let me check my schedule and get back to you in 3 weeks. Right? Because there's a different level of intangibility that's going to come with everything you do with the Olympics if it is like a dream versus, yeah, I'll feel bad if I say no, right? I don't want to be the guy who said no.
Right. They're going to play Iran on Tuesday. So, I mean, things will look a little different as far as, well, you would hope.
They better. They better.
You would hope. By the time we're doing this next podcast, we're looking at a team that's at least beaten Iran for the record. I also think Team USA is a little hamstrung because the extension of the NBA season, the way it had to go, that
absolutely
they're not used to playing late in July. Right, like they're used to being done in June. So by the time guys, and some of these guys like Rudy Gobert and Nick Batum, like they've been gone for a little while from their team. Like they've had a couple of weeks to go practice with France. we've had at least 3 of our players and have like a couple of weeks in Vegas with Greg Popovich, and
You know what the ideal would be, and this just popped into my head, and this will never happen because the logistics are too impossible. But we've all seen that when you try to throw NBA players together at the All-Star game every single year, and you've got the overwhelming talent, it still is just kind of a disjointed crapshoot of an affair it's fun only because both teams understand that they're not going to play defense. You want to overcome this problem. You do a luck of the draw or a huge bonus or some sort of system. Maybe you add it into the playoff tournament and you send a team's entire roster plus a couple of guys who get added in because, of course, every team's always got foreign players who probably aren't going to commit. You take that entire roster that's been drilling and playing together all year and has gone through a season, and you send them to the Olympics. And I think things are on a very different level. Even if it's a 500 team, if I'm sending the Indiana Pacers and they've played all season together, and they're healthy and they had time, maybe they played out of the play-in tournament or something like that. They fell out of it and now they've got weeks or months to rest and drill up. That's a totally different thing. But I sweeten that pot so much that they're like, yeah, we'll go do that. The only issue, of course, is like team representation, and you've got the contract issues that might be involved. If a guy's going to free agency, he may not want to do it. And you might have a bad luck of the draw where one team's roster is made up of 50% foreign players. So it's never going to happen. But to me, that's how you would get over the chemistry style issue.
What if you sort of made it like the NFL and HBO do with Hard Knocks? Like there's a pool of teams that can be considered, right, for this, and then you would talk to those teams, right? Like you would obviously look through, what's coming up with restricted free agency and unrestricted, and you would see sort of what the marketplace is going to look like by the time you would get to that July. And now we're at July 3 years from now, and then you would sort of say like, maybe in January of that year or something, you start to figure out who may or may not be in. You just start to whittle down that list slowly and slowly and slowly, and maybe you find a team that is willing to do it. And some guys who want to take vacation and really be with their family, that's fine. It's a long season. Then, you bring in Trae Young for the 2024 team who wants to do it. You bring in some of these guys who will be on the Indiana Pacers plus team.
Right, who volunteered. Yeah, I don't hate that, or I don't hate that idea at all. Or you've got a few teams to choose from. You could really get rid of tanking if you said, if you finish in the bottom 5 during the next 4 years, we can draft any of your players into the Olympic team.
Now I'm in.
You might solve tanking that way. Just from the player side, not to mention the organization. I don't know. There's no easy, obvious fix to this, or they would have done it already. But the fact of the matter is the world keeps getting better, and I think we do have to get used to the idea that no, the American team is not going to automatically medal for gold every time they go to the Olympics just because they're the American team. It's not going to be a surprise if this team gets silver or even bronze. With all of these other extenuating circumstances, built-in excuses, whatever you want to call it, it is just the nature of things that you have other teams that are like France, we just said, that are trotting out all those NBA players. You have teams that are going to have Nikola Jokic and Giannis on them, and like MVP level players with the rest of their team. That's not a bad team to begin with. Like it's getting scary out there, and it goes beyond like Spain and France and Argentina that were kind of the traditional powerhouses who the US knew, yeah, we're going to run into them. That's going to be a tough game. We'll probably win, but it's going to be real tough. You've now like doubled and tripled the number of teams that are at that level of danger.
Yeah, because listen, like you can bring up Pop's record in the international basketball. He's coming up at the absolute worst time to sort of just judge records, by the way. I mean, his losses now are more than we've had in the last like 25 years before he got there combined. Just because, like you said, that discrepancy between the pure top level talent wasn't there. And that's, by the way, it's a beautiful thing the NBA has done when they've made this thing global. Right. It's that they have made this thing so popular and so sought after that guys want to do this and guys want to train for this. And you do find people with ability all over the planet. And next thing you know, Nigeria can beat the United States because they got a couple NBA players. Like, you're like, what? You're like, yeah, you don't remember where everybody's from? Because it's a
Right.
truly international game now. I know we only think of it as the United States, and everybody who's in the NBA is from the United States. We clearly know that's not true.
And how arrogant of us to be like, oh man, you mean we're not beating up teams by 50 points anymore? This is a shamakery. Like, no, dude, it's competitive now. And you don't think that those teams who got beat for 50 points back in the day are still chomping at the bit, that there's people within the organization, probably former players who are now assistant coaches and on the management team or are involved in some way, who are going, yeah, I want to get those guys back. I want to be the team that takes down USA. I want that more than anything. You don't think those guys like stay up at night thinking about that stuff and how cool that would be for them? Come on.
Yeah, you don't have your opponents coming to you for autographs before the game,
right?
Right? Like it's
some of them still do that after the game, but I mean, that's fine, cool, whatever.
After's different, and after's a little different because not everybody for Team Australia played in the NBA, right? Like, so we sort of get that there is a starstruckness, but not nearly as much so. And by the way, for those who hate the NBA because it's gotten to this product where they've kind of officiated into a TV product to try to make it a more watchable product. Like, if you miss the 80s and 90s basketball, like, turn on
the Olympics,
turn on your Peacock, turn on international like, it's what it is. Like, it's exactly what you were missing. Not as many punches at midcourt, as you would probably want, or leaps into the stands. But it's the basketball the way you want it. Joel, do you look at this kind of basketball? And we can sort of end on this. Do you look at this kind of basketball as some people say the basketball, quote, the right way?
Yeah. Purity of the game. What a subjective thing that is.
Well, like, it's how you think, right? Like, I'm
exactly.
I'm asking you what you think.
Where do I think? I'm always both sides of the coin guy. So the wide open, freewheeling, 3-point shooting nature, free flowing nature of the modern NBA, I think is absolutely in the spirit of the game. The physicality and the ability to defend a little bit more and the lack of superstar calls, I think, is the spirit of the NBA, or spirit of the game as well. So I would take those aspects and the drilled nature. You can really tell that these teams practice together a lot. They share the ball so well. There's egoless basketball. And yeah, there's a lot of ego under the surface that you kind of don't see about how these foreign teams are set up sometimes and the hierarchy. But I think those aspects are really admirable. And I wish that they existed in the NBA a little bit more. So move the ball without any hesitation, whether you'll get it back and you don't care who scores. I wish you would do away with the superstar call thing completely. I understand that in certain motions you might get away with an extra step, but I wish that would be cracked down on a whole lot more, because there are still times where you can see a guy in the NBA get away with 4 steps. That's ridiculous. Like, that has no place. And it's always the same guys, and it's always the superstar guy who got that. So to me, that favoritism, I would love to see eradicated. And I know it's a little bit impossible to go, yeah, the physicality needs to be there, but I want the free-flowing aspect of it too. I do think there's a happy medium in there somewhere. So I'm happy overall with the way the NBA has gone, because guess what? The superstar call bullcrap, that existed back in the 80s and 90s too. Yeah. Like, that was a thing. And that was really a thing around the Jordan era, and it just never left. So that's something I wish we could get rid of.
Yeah, I'm much more a fan of the current NBA. Like, I lived through the 90s NBA and early 2000s NBA, and that's fine. I think the game evolved, and I think it evolved to a cleaner, more smoother product that's not as many whistles, not as many slowdowns in the action. That kind of stuff I actually do prefer the current game compared to, like, Olympic basketball. It's by the way, it's kind of a jolt when you're so, like, you watch the finals and then you watch I watched USA France and was like, oh, hey, okay, all right, here we go. Buckle up, a little different.
Yeah, the final. I know the amount of time they play is different too, but a final score is 83-76. That right there tells you the game is different, right? You haven't seen that score in an NBA game as a final in forever.
Yeah, you remember like going back watching like The Last Dance, like how many times they would show the final score. Of,
Yeah.
like, you'd be like,
high 70s, low 80s. Yeah.
They won 81 to 74.
Mm-hmm.
Did they only play 4-minute quarters? What happened back then?
Yeah.
All right, that's going to do it for us here on the BbA. We'll be back next week for more discussion, including free agency happening up next week. So we'll talk about that coming up for next week's pod. But in the meantime, Joel, where can people find the video of this bad boy?
We are on the YouTubes. Please like, share, subscribe, all that good stuff. Get the notifications. And if you want the audio-only version, we are on Spreaker and iTunes and Spotify and wherever you get your podcasts. This has been episode 69, the Wes Unseld Sr. and Mel Daniels episode. See ya.